Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to our Bible study here for Sunshine Baptist Church as we are going through the book of Ephesians. We're hitting the home stretch, starting out in, we're in chapter 6 now, the last chapter, rolling right through, and we've been going through some house rules as we've looked at the roles of husbands and wives and mothers and fathers and also of children. The last one here with the house rules, I'm going to call the house rules appendix because it kind of goes along with the same things we've been looking at, but it's not really about the house. It would have been during Paul's time, but not so much in the culture we live in today. And you'll see what I mean by that as we go through it. I want to invite you to Sunday school and church at Sunshine. Sunday school starts at 10. We got church at 11. I want to thank Ron Witt for the wonderful testimony and the wonderful songs he done this morning. Travis done a great job this morning with the sermon. Appreciate everybody that's been helping out with that. Bruce and Ken and everybody. And don't forget, we're going to have church on Wednesday night. We'll have the adult classes, and we also got teen and youth stuff going on. So lots of opportunities to worship the Lord this week at Sunshine. That being said, we're going to move again into Ephesians chapter 6, and we're going to do verses 5 through 9 this evening. We're going to be looking at some verses that talks about slaves obeying their masters and that kind of thing, and we're going to see how we can take what's being said during that time and apply it to the world we live in today. All right? So let's start taking a look at the verses. So today we're going to be looking at verses 5 through 9 in Ephesians chapter 6. It starts out with, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in singleness of your heart, and as unto Christ, not with eye service, as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven. Neither is there respect of persons with him." Now, as we start right here with verses 5 and 6, it says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service, as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart." Okay? The word servant here, as we look it up, we get the idea of enslaved or subject to. This particular word is referring to a male slave. And with a master, you've got somebody who would be an owner of property. A lord or master. And a lot of times this same word is used for the Lord when referring to Jesus. Now, one thing to keep in mind about when we're talking about servants or slaves during the time that Paul was writing this, during this time in Greek culture, it is not the same thing. It was not the same type of setup as we had during the time of slavery in America, in the United States, and that kind of thing. This was in some cases could be as bad, but in many cases, these type of slaves were often sold themselves into slavery, where they worked for a master, and then in return from something from the master. Sometimes it was wages. Many of them lived within the household. I think that's why it's included in these verses with the house rules. They had the right to marry and have children and do these type of things. The master themselves did have the right to beat them or threaten them or even kill them in some instances, but it was a very rare thing. It was frowned upon for them to do that in the Greek culture. During the first century, probably as upwards as much as 2/3 of the Roman Empire were considered slaves, and up past that, it got as high as 90% at times would all be considered slaves, and very few would actually be considered citizens. So to really apply these two verses and the verses we're looking at up through 9, we kind of have to translate that into our own culture. And if we were going to try to figure out how we're supposed to be obedient to God based on these verses in today's culture, it would look more like an employer-employee relationship, okay? Of course, it doesn't line up exactly, but that's about what we're looking at here. People like me who, and most everybody that works for somebody, like I've got a supervisor and a second level and third level supervisor and that kind of thing where I work. Many of you have the same thing. You know, the teachers have got principals and superintendents, and past that you got the Board of Education and all that good stuff. So what we're looking at here now is the relationship that God wants us to have with our employees or our employers, depending on where your position is. Sometimes you may be some kind of middle management person who you're both have employees under you, and then you have a supervisor over top of you, where you're kind of both. And way that we're supposed to conduct ourselves, say in a business setting, day to day. This is a relationship that is like a work relationship that we have with co-workers and that kind of thing. Co-workers are, as most of you know at this point, are often not the easiest people to deal with. Could be maybe you're the one that's not the easiest to deal with. I know at times I am definitely not the easiest one to deal with. But as we're looking at this, let's get an idea of what Paul's trying to say here, okay? Let's look at the attitude that we should have. We're going to start out with servants, and we'll think of that as an employee working for a supervisor or a boss of some kind. And it says, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh. Okay, according to the flesh means that we need to do what we're told by those who have been put in charge of us here in this world, in the physical world that we live in, or in part of the world culture, world economy, so to speak. Now, the idea behind this is, to go out and do the job that you were told to do and do it the way you were supposed to do it instead of the way you think it ought to be done. The idea that you're going to go out and do, that an employer can count on you going out and doing what it is he or she has asked you to do, okay? Now, it says, with fear and trembling in singleness of your heart as unto Christ. So the idea about this is to have a single purpose. That is to do everything to be obedient and please whoever it is you're working for, not for their sake, not for your sake, but for Christ's sake. The whole idea is you're going to have this attitude, this positive attitude about work, this positive attitude about who you're working for. Whether they're good to work for or not, you're going to have this attitude as if everything you're doing it like you're doing it for Christ. And if you're doing it for Christ, we should be throwing everything into it, be enthusiastic about it, and do it the way that we've been asked to do it and that kind of thing. So this kind of runs counterculture. I know I fall into this often enough, grumbling about work, grumbling about policies, grumbling about the way they want things done, and that kind of thing. And you see that in anywhere. You see that in the school systems, or if you work for the hospital, or you work for just a self-employed person or a company or whatever. People do tend to grumble at times when this thing goes on, right? So that's what he's talking about there, in the singleness of your heart as unto Christ. So they were very much talking about our attitude toward work, toward our employers, okay? Now it says, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Now what it means here by, it says, not with eye service as men pleasers. So this is the idea of you should be working hard, doing what you're supposed to be doing, even when the employer isn't looking at you, even when whoever it is that makes the decisions for you for the workday is not got their eyes right on you and they're not paying attention, you're working hard. You're not trying to get away with whatever. So this is what we're looking at here. This idea of if we're doing this toward God, if we're looking to please God, and we know that God is everywhere all the time and he sees everything we do, it would be impossible for us to say, oh, well, God's not looking, so I'm going to slow down and slack off or take a break or whatever. This is the kind of thing it's talking about here. Okay? We're not working, when we're working a job, we want to do our best to do what we're asked to do by those who are in charge of wherever you're working, okay? For the sake of Jesus Christ. We're doing this very thing so that people can see that we are born again Christians and pointing everybody toward Christ. All this for the glory of God. So this kind of runs counterculture in today's world where everybody's worried about their rights, everybody's worried about their rights being taken away, they're worried about them being treated fairly. You hear a lot about that's not fair, but nowhere in the Bible have I ever seen God say that life is going to be fair. Don't see anything about fair in there. So this is one of those type of things. So as we're looking at it again, this is not with eye service as men pleasers, okay? But as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Now, when he says doing the will of God from the heart here, it is the will of God that we make our best effort when we're at work, working for an employee, as an employer or an employee. So as this is going on, like I said, it runs very much counter to the culture we live in today. It's completely different than what a lot of people are saying. All around us, we see protest. We see people who are discontent with their lot in life, and there are very few people you'll ever find will have good things to say about the person that they work directly under and that kind of thing. So this is sometimes a hard set of instructions to obey, but nevertheless, there it is, and it makes for a more happy, cohesive workplace if you are there to glorify God and not to sow discord or make everything dysfunctional. Now we have Paul answering the big $5 toddler question of why. Why is a big thing. Why should we do these things? Why should we bother trying to get along with the people we work for? Why should we do our best to put forth our best effort to do what they want done the way they want it done? It is because, as you see here in verse 8, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall receive of the Lord, whether it be bond or free. And you, okay, so there you see, whether you actually be a bond servant, that is, or someone who is free, okay, that is not a slave, that is not a bond servant. And then he goes on to say, and ye masters do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that in your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. So as we're looking at this, we get this idea of, now we get to the masters. This would be the bosses. This would be people that's in a supervisory type position. This would be somebody who's making decisions on hiring and firing or suspending or rewarding or not rewarding, or just giving somebody a good butt chewing over the way things are going. It says here to forbearing, threatening, talking about not going around threatening to fire people all the time, knowing that your master is also in heaven. So he's making a point here that both the slave or the servant and the master's master is in heaven. They have a common master who is in heaven watching both of them, and he has certain things that he expects out of both these roles within the culture. Okay, and he says neither is there respect of persons with him. So God views both slave and master, both servant and master, both employer and employee, if we're going to translate it into today's world, as equals in the kingdom of God. And that we need to remember that whether we are the servant or the master, whether we're the employee or the employer, God has laid out certain stipulations of how he thinks or how he knows that this is supposed to work. How a good, perfect work environment would work. You would have a master who's not always trying to bear down on people, who doesn't lead by fear, who doesn't push the goats from behind but leads the sheep from the front. And then you got the employee who is dedicated to doing the task that the employer has set out and doing it exactly the way he wants it done. Why? Because he's doing it for Jesus Christ. All these things to point people toward Christ, to help us be able to witness to other people. That people can see that we are holy and set apart. That people that are lost can see just by watching us that we are different than the world around us. And that's what these type of things will do. Not only will you have a more cohesive and a more harmony within the workplace itself, but you're also going to have a better chance to point people toward Christ. Okay, guys, that kind of covers a lot of this. I think once we figure out how to apply this idea of servants be subject to your masters to today's culture in 2020 in the United States, how that applies to us, and we can apply it to our lives now, it becomes kind of more straightforward of what's going on here. A couple of other quick verses I'll point out that kind of says the same thing. Is you've got 1 Peter 2:18 and 19. It says, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward. For this is thankworthy, if a man for conscience toward God endure grief and suffering wrongfully. Okay? Here it's talking about being subject to or doing what you're asked to do by your supervisor or boss or whatever, whether they're a good one or not. Whether you like them or you don't, it shouldn't make any difference about how you do your job. 1 Timothy chapter 6, 1-3 says, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and his doctrine not be blasphemed. And that they have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren. Rather, do them service, because they are faithful and beloved and partakers of the benefit. So again, you've got this idea of no matter what the work environment is, we should be thought of or considered as faithful, hardworking, dependable people at work. You know, somebody that can be counted on. And like I said, this didn't exactly go with the house rules, so I was going to call it House Rule Appendix, even though during Paul's day it would have very much went with the house rules, just because of the fact that, you know, a lot of times slaves or servants were actually part of the household and lived there and worked and all that kind of thing. Excuse me. Now, that being said, that'll cover the house rules, and Paul's going to start wrapping up his letter here, and we'll finish that up in the next few weeks. And God bless all of you, and I hope you have a good week. And remember to pray, and remember to read your Bible, and remember to tell others about Jesus Christ. And remember that even though we've got all this going on, we've got a bad economy due to the COVID-19, we've got the COVID-19 stuff going on, everybody's life is turned upside down, that God is still sitting on the throne in heaven. All right. Have a good evening. Bye.